I'd like to welcome you to Buscot House Garden this morning and tell you a little bit about it. My family have been here 100 years and each of them have had input into the gardens. And more recently, we've changed it from being a vegetable garden to becoming more of a flower garden, which is what the public seem to like. As you'll notice going round that there's no sort of rhyme or reason for these gardens. There's no template, and the whole thing has been built up over a number of years by my family, who've had ideas and paid the bills and done what they want, trying not to get rid of the better things that the previous generations had done. The walled garden, when I arrived, was full of greenhouses and gardeners. The greenhouses themselves had started to fall to bits because of the lack of maintenance during the war. When I came along, things were rather different. The greenhouses had dilapidated further. This left a vacuum, an emptiness, which we scratched our head about and decided that what would be best would be to have a flower garden in the central bit and to only have a very limited amount of new greenhouse. We therefore created the Four Seasons garden, and that has sort of built up over the years, and it has had help from Tim Rees and from one or two other people. But perhaps the most interesting bit was that previously we'd had rather exotic things grown in the garden, and that, of course, with the disappearance of the greenhouses, had to disappear.
The Four Seasons walled garden at Buscot Park is an amazing rose garden in its own right, but it's also one of the finest examples of an English walled vegetable garden that you would find. I think a large part of the success of Buscot Park Gardens is due to the fact that Lord and Lady Farringdon are very keen and passionate gardeners themselves. One of the things that impresses me most about the gardens at Buscot is the attention to detail in the design that's gone in. The vegetable and fruit theme runs through into the trees with the inclusion of the silver pear, the leguminous Circis arch, the Indian bean tree and the hop hornbeam. So here we have the Maiden's Blush rose, and in order to keep a nice display, we take off the spent flower heads. So here we have the Speckled Swan gourd, which is one of Lord Farringdon's personal favourites. And it's called the Speckled Swan gourd because it has a curved neck when the gourd is fully formed.
The planting of the walled garden has actually been transformed to some extent in the sort of autumn months by introducing climbing vegetables. We now have 50 different sorts of climbers, so that when the roses have done their stuff and the shrubs have turning rather nasty autumn colour, the vegetables climb all over them and in fact climb up the walls and give you a display of gourds, and they actually give you back the sort of vegetable garden that I got rid of when I inherited. This pleached hedge is of some interest. It's Australia carpinifolia, which is a distinct species. It has green leaves, as you can see, and then it has these wonderful yellow hops. But unfortunately, they are transgender, and so they don't hop every year, which is absolutely sickening. The wood itself is interesting because it's so hard that it's almost impossible to use, and the only known use for it is auctioneer's mallets. In the middle of the garden is this round pond with a copy of the famous statue that was in the patrician's house in the Reggio and is now in the museum in Naples. The planting of the walled garden seemed rather incomplete without stops at either end. And I've always had a passion for wanting a waterfall and couldn't see a way of doing it. I saw David Harbour had these sheets of metal which had water flowing over them. On a good day, it does slightly look like a waterfall, and we put a statue of Aphrodite in the temple with her bucket tipping into it. The black Hamburg vine in the greenhouse is supposed to be the eldest child of the vine at Hampton Court, and it was thought to have been introduced to the garden in 1782. It's a black grape, and it's very prolific normally, but about 5 years ago it suddenly took a turn for the worst, and we thought it was going to die on us. We've now got, I think, 25 new rods, and we probably will have a couple of hundred bunches. This border is called Parents Walk, and it was designed in the early 80s by Peter Coates, who chose plants which he could find all round the garden, which meant that we didn't have to go out and buy any new ones. What I particularly like is the choice of delphinium, which is this pink one. Delphinium should normally be white or blue. This is pink, it's called Turkish Delight, and it's a marvellous flower. Along the border, both sides, we've got these gilded catalpas, and they replace the Robinia frisias that got disease. We also had a disease problem with the iceberg roses. We introduced this new one, which is called Windrush, which has no disease at all. Parents Walk is so called because it's a route from the house to where my son lived in the garden cottage, which had no steps and which seemed to me rather a good and quickest way of getting there without having to go through the centre garden. On the old bowling green, it was the wrong shape really for bowls altogether, and there was this blank, and I thought we needed some statuary in it to fill it up, and I couldn't afford any good stuff. So I went onto the internet to see if I could get some warriors from China. I brought 17 of them across. In 1904 and 1911, my great-grandfather got Harold Peto to try and bring a bit of professional design to the gardens, and the water garden is the result. He took it in 2 bites, I think partly because the rills at the bottom, just on their own, looked rather blank. He therefore extended it upwards to the house to give a connection between the house and the lake. It consisted really of a very heavy pergola down the main strip with roses growing up it, and with a statuary of herms and others on either side. It had a very Italian overtone to it, because that's what his gardens were all about. But when my uncle came along, he thought that the view of the lake down the water garden was obstructed by the pergola, so had it out, and it did improve it enormously, according to my mother anyhow, who said it was transformed it. When the pagoda was here, they used to have plays, and they were all rather underdressed, I think, doing it, but the famous one was Midsummer's Night's Dream, and there is, in fact, pictures of it on the murals about the theatre. Then he planted some junipers either side, some of which have done all right and some of which have not done all right. Then the elms all died either side, and that let a lot more light in, and eventually it became rather a lighter alley. But across the lake was a temple which Peter had put in. And one day my uncle and I were walking down the water garden, and Felix Kelly said to him, "Pity you've got such a small lake." And my uncle was very indignant indeed. He says, "My big lake." And he said, "Well, it looks pretty small to me." And he said, "Well, if you lower the roof of the temple, it will appear further away." And sure enough, the carpenters went in the week after and lowered the roof of the temple, and it did make the lake look bigger. At the side of the lake, onto the second island, we have built a bridge. It was designed by a man called Richard La Trobe Bateson. It had a mechanism on it which involved getting on one's hands and knees and putting a handle into a winch and winding the thing backwards and forwards. So I said to him that I would try and find a way of the bridge opening and closing without having human intervention. They'd solved it with a solar motor which works by remote control. They think there's no other solar bridge in the world.
This statue, which is at the center of the Haropito water garden, is something that he had copied in bronze from an original Roman marble sculpture. And what it shows is a dolphin in a loving embrace with a Nereid, who is a water nymph. So it seems rather appropriate that it should be here in this water garden.
The whole concept of the pleasure gardens was to extend the avenues in the shape of a goosefoot pat d'oeil, and my uncle started by putting an avenue next to the water gardens down to what's now the swing garden.
Hello, I'm Lucinda Henderson. I live at Buscot Park with my family. This is the swing garden, created by my mother-in-law, Lady Farringdon. It's a white oasis of calm and has the most wonderful collection of roses and other plants that you can enjoy throughout the season. Behind me is the sycamore sculpture designed by David Watkinson, which gently rotates in the breeze.
We then took the avenue further up to where my uncle is buried. In 1977, when my uncle died, he left a letter of wishes to have his remains put in this spot here. And he also wanted a stopper put in to try and keep him dry. He had a friend who asked if his ashes could be commingled with my uncle's. And so we had to pull the stopper out again. But luckily his executors came down with a huge casket which wouldn't fit in the pot, and therefore it had to be buried beneath the plinth. And then his chef and subsequently his housekeeper both asked if they could be buried here as well. But I thought it was a rather nice idea because he'd end up with his friend, his chef, and his housekeeper, and he'd be quite dry. An Egyptian walk would not be right without a pyramid, but I couldn't find a place to put it that didn't block the view. So I took the view that one should really have one you could see through. And David Harbour built this one for me. And because it's such an idiotic idea, I thought it really needed idiotic things put up in the roof. And in the roof, we've got a saying from the Dilettanti Society. It's one of their toasts, which is seria ludo, which really means don't take life too seriously. And it's also got David Harbour Fecit. And on the other side, it's got Farringdon deficit. A pun, I thought. But anyhow, it makes it a bit larky. And my wife keeps on saying, and when is the tent coming? Because it looks like a sort of skeleton on which you should drop a tent. But anyhow, I quite like it. And we eventually hope to get some pair of sarcophagus to go either side.
What we see here are statues of Antinous Osiris. He was the Emperor Hadrian's pet. He's also the bees around here are very fond of him. They've colonized, they put a bonnet of bees over his head. He's interesting to us because he links the furniture by Thomas Hope in the house with these, which were part of Thomas Hope's mausoleum. They show the Emperor Hadrian's favorite, who died on the Feast of Osiris, and Hadrian mourned so much that he created him a god. And they form this focus of our Egyptian Avenue at Buscot Park.
The Egyptian Avenue grew rather like Topsy. The Antinous statues came from Deep Dean, and that sort of brought a bit of cohesion to the whole Egyptian effect. We had the sphinxes and we had a few obelisks, but we tried to improve it by having a new obelisk, which was designed by Mark Lennox Boyd, which is, in his view, the most accurate sundial that's ever been made. It had been suggested to me years ago by Sir Roy Strong. It would be nice to have a sort of circle of obelisks. 10 years later, I've done it, and I'm rather pleased with it. There had been a Queen Elizabeth of Egypt in the year 200, and the hieroglyphs say, Queen Elizabeth, may she reign eternally. And I thought that was a jolly thing to have on her 60th year of reigning. The next avenue is a combination of beech and hornbeam. We've had to plant hornbeam because the beech didn't like it there and it died on us. And as a result, it's a slight muddle. But it leads to a sort of crescent lake where there's a naked man who used to be submerged. But because the reservoir has now disappeared, the water level in the crescent pond has lowered, and so you can see all of him, much to the amusement of some. Beyond it is a slate vase. That was constructed by a man called Joe Smith, who does it completely by eye. It's dry slate, which he puts together on site. They are rather fun. The last avenue is the back drive, which takes you up to what is known as Cannon Hill. It's named Cannon Hill after Captain Cannon, who was Cromwell's leader during the Civil War. On the top of it is now a bit of a mound, which is the foundations dug out of Plantation House. And on the top of the hill, I put a jawbone of a whale, which my grandfather had brought back from Canada in 1922. And apparently, it's the biggest whale that they know of. But it looked rather blank on its own. So one day, the keeper saw a roebuck standing underneath it on the top of the hill. And I thought it'd be rather fun to immortalize that. So I got Elizabeth MacDonald Buchanan to do a bronze, and there it sits under the jaws. The lily pond has mercury in it, and I've given it a little fountain to chirp it up a bit. And we've also had someone make a frog for me, because I thought a frog looked rather nice lying on his back and squirting water over the lilies. This is where we say goodbye. I hope you've enjoyed the tour of Buscot House Gardens. You're going to be given, as the last view, the oldest view from the original building of Buscot in 1780, when you could look directly from the gardens down to the bridge on the lake. I hope you've enjoyed yourselves.